When you hear the word Blaxploitation, you may think about black people being exploited in the film industry. While you might be right about the exploitativeness of the genre of media, you've still got it all wrong. Blaxploitation refers primarily to a wave of independently produced genre films of the early 1970s. The name was a portmanteau of black and exploitation. Blaxploitation films were produced independently, and typically with extremely low budgets. Black exploitation films were predominantly made by black crews for black audiences. Crime, sex, drugs, and racial tensions were common subjects for blaxploitation films. However, blaxploitation, by definition, was the exploitation of black culture through stereotypes and needless nudity. I suppose the idea was to take back the stereotype and make it their own. It was a genre that commented on the prevalence of black characters only playing criminals and sidekicks. The blaxploitation genre seeks to portray black people as heroes and protagonists. Similar to Afrofuturism, blaxploitation was a genre that wanted to flip the narrative on the antagonist stereotypes that were widespread throughout America. It was an explicit effort to appeal to black urban audiences and set the precedent for African American coming-of-age stories in the 1970s. The genre sought to allow black people to determine their own destinies and to destroy the stereotype linking black people with drugs, crime, violence, and film. When you think about the average coming-of-age film, it's usually a pretty white cast set in high school. They're dealing with family issues, college issues, or friend issues. It's a journey for them to learn who they are. That's something I'd like to see more of in black media, because anytime there's a black coming-of-age movie, it will deal with the same stereotypes from nearly 50 years ago. Black media shouldn't just be about the dark sides of humanity. It should also highlight the youthfulness and the light parts of late adolescence. It might be idealistic and not at all realistic to how school life for youth is in America, but don't we deserve some lighthearted fun? When we talk about people who contributed the most to the blaxploitation or black film era, we're first going to be talking about Pam Grier. Of all the stars mentioned during this era, Pam Grier was the most well-known and powerful. The first ever African-American woman to star in an action film, Pam Grier paved the way for women in Hollywood. One of her more popular films, Foxy was highly criticized as it seemed to be taking steps backwards in a time where African-Americans were progressing politically, socially, and economically. In films during this time, women were usually depicted as scantily clad victims. That is, until Grier's portrayal of a woman out for blood turned the tables and sometimes a few chairs. Her characters used self-aware sexuality to further their agendas, and it was making men nervous. She used her platform to address the sexist, gender oppressionist bullshit that was 70s white media. Grier, applauded by feminist Gloria Steinem for her defiance of gender stereotypes, became another talking point in the then-rising second-wave feminist movement. Circling back to blaxploitation films as a whole, they provided the first on-screen opportunities for audiences to see black characters presented as heroes taking down white villains. Detractors of the blaxploitation genre considered the film movement harmful, mainly for perpetrating and furthering stereotypes. However, these stereotypes were things that America as a whole had built up themselves. Rather than make every black film a political talking point, they went for a more subtle approach, tackling harmful stereotypes and turning them into something more positive. If we circle around a few decades prior, we come across Mr. Oscar Mitchell. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, or the 1900s, Mitchell depicted contemporary black life and complex characters in his films, countering the negative on-screen portrayal of blacks at the time. Oscar was a pioneer for black film. Becoming his own form of a triple threat, he tackled many societal issues of his time. After the success of his first film, titled Homesteader, a homage to the difficult relationship between black and white people, Oscar created his second film, Within Our Gates, which is meant to challenge the racist stereotypes in the infamous film, The Birth of a Nation.
The Homesteader began Micheaux's career as the first major independent producer-director of black films. His work critiqued the racist stereotypes of black people typically depicted in Hollywood films.
You are seeing a whole range of black characters on the screen, assertive, articulate, often sophisticated, strong characters who are trying to do something for themselves and the community.
His fifth film, Within Our Gates, directly rebutted the blatant racism of D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, a 3-hour-long piece of Jim Crow-era propaganda.
Within Our Gates responds directly to Birth of a Nation. The negative, stereotypical portraits of black people that were shown there were not how black people really were. And then, showing that white supremacy was really the main problem in the South.
Other films, like The Symbol of the Unconquered and Body and Soul, sought to entertain while also delivering social commentary.
He covered issues that were not being covered in film, generally speaking. Lynching, discrimination, struggles around employment, class differences amongst African Americans.
Censor boards often edited Micheaux's movies or rejected them outright. He used these attempts to censor his work to his advantage, marketing uncensored versions to curious and daring audiences. Forced to fund his own work, Micheaux's success was self-made. Over a career spanning more than 3 decades, Micheaux created more than 35 films and is considered the most influential African-American filmmaker of his time.
There are a lot of ways that I think when we see a figure like Tyler Perry, for example, today, or Spike Lee, they're not just filmmakers, but they're also really trying to speak to the most important issues facing the audiences that they are speaking to. And Oscar Micheaux was doing that at the beginning of the 20th century. The silent period is an important cultural moment because it's a moment that is characterized by racial discrimination in the United States. The most significant American film released during the 19-teens was D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. It was really a cultural phenomenon. And this is a film that glorifies the Ku Klux Klan and talks about the ways in which the South was slipping and in danger of a rising Black population after slavery. Micheaux wanted to respond to the kind of thinking that made that film possible and made it so popular. His film, The Symbol of the Unconquered, for example, shows the Ku Klux Klan and the way that these night rides were intended to really terrorize Black people and make them afraid to pursue the American dream, and really delves into the reasons why they have so much anxiety about the idea of a successful Black population. He wasn't just responding to racism in mainstream films, that he was also reflecting these cultural traditions from the Black community. He was very much invested in giving his audiences more positive and more realistic images that they could feel a connection to. There's a really powerful score that the jazz drummer Max Roach, who is one of the legends in the jazz world, created for Oscar Micheaux's film. And the score consists only of him playing drums. And so he gives us these real powerful nuances of sound, sometimes quite bombastic, other times really soft and subtle. And then he actually makes the drums go completely silent. And for a few moments, we really take in the profound nature of the violence and the threats that we're seeing on screen. Silent films actually offer this really powerful and unique canvas for contemporary musicians to think about how it is that their practice can keep these films relevant for audiences today. And they serve as a way of creating collaborative opportunities between artists across a century.
And when we talk about Black film in the modern era, we're talking about Jordan Peele or Spike Lee. Right now, I'm talking about Spike Lee. My favorite movie from him would have to be Chirac. It's a wonderful critique of American nonchalance and negligence when it comes to Black neighborhoods or gang or gun violence. I don't have too much to say about Spike, but if you do, drop a comment and tell me all about him. Thanks for watching, and why don't you have a mocktail cocktail Cosmo to end your night?